Hi, everyone. Welcome to TRG 30. I'm so glad to be with you today on July 1st, Canada Day. So happy holidays to our colleagues in Canada who are listening with us now or will on our recording later. TRG 30 is about listening to you. And in fact, that listening is what helped me and us think about the 7 new ways that we at TRG and you are considering leaning in, creating bold change and innovation that helps fuel the resiliency of our sector. And one of those bold new ways is this: listening. Listening to our audiences, listening to our communities so that we can act. And that action requires that we not just listen, but also close loops, actually engage in conversation and two-way dialogue. Back at the beginning of January, we at TRG were curious about whether we're listeners in our sector, fielded 2,000 or just a little bit more surveys and got a healthy almost 15% response rate to the question, are you listening in your organizations? Are you surveying your patrons on a regular basis? And most of you said we are. Almost 90% of you said at least once a year we're sending out a survey to build on the efforts that happen to listen in our box offices, in our philanthropy or development departments. But just 25% of you said we are actually closing loops in that listening, picking up the phone or sending an email to begin dialogue. And an even smaller proportion of you said we're acting. Something is changing in our organization as a result. Well, why are we talking about this now? Now is an extraordinary time of change. If only we look at programming, whether it's temporary or permanent, the new ways that we're distributing and engaging our experiences with our communities and our patrons is new for us. It's new for our communities. This is a huge opportunity to shine, be responsive, and create new connections. But it's also a time of risk, not just revenue risk, but relationship risk. If we're not in direct contact, how will the relationships that have fueled us and that have given mutual joy, how might those stagnate? And as importantly, as we all consider how arts and culture is relevant in our communities, we must be in a listening mode and in an engagement mode. And yet, this is hard. This is NASA getting a rocket and a man to the moon hard. We have smaller budgets. We have no or much reduced staff. So there's no question that this is a time when this effort is challenged, and it also forces us to develop new muscles in listening that the data suggests most of us don't have. And yet, our sector's ability to recover requires that we lean in with this mindset, and really second only to safety with this mindset. We would argue customer interactions must be a priority, and things are shifting. Depending on the nation you're in, depending on the province or state or region that you're in, your segments in your database and in your communities will need different things from you at different times. The only way to be understanding this is to be listening, dialoguing, and learning. And we've got to make this easy, especially if we're interested in leaning into our communities. We've got to make it easy and not make assumptions that the things that we used to do, the ways that we used to show up, present, produce, engage are right now. The only way to do that is create direct connections, test and learn, engage and listen. And of course, we've got to do that with smaller resources. So we have to deploy them with this in mind And that means stop deploying resources in other areas, making that shift and investing thoughtfully. So it's with these things in mind that I want to introduce to you today a cohort of audience and patron loyalty leaders who, with me and Fred Reichelt, whom you met back in April on TRG 30 then. Fred is the originating developer of the Net Promoter System and Score. He wrote several books, including this one, The Ultimate Question. Fred, TRG, and this group have created a pilot, Net Promoter System in the Arts pilot. And this group of theater organizations that span nations from England to Canada, commercial and nonprofit, these loyalty leaders have been organizing their staff teams since last summer to do these things that you see here, to deploy campaigns of listening that ask their communities and patrons and audiences, would you recommend this? Would you recommend subscribing, being a member, this event? And if so, why would you do that? And what could we do? Most importantly, what could we do to improve your experience and our relationship? They began reporting that within their teams in an integrated way so that they could measure it and organize a response to change action, all with the idea in mind that it would deepen and benefit the relationship from the audience side, but also deepen the sustaining revenues, and that the investment made would return on the ROI side for their organizations. All of this is about culture. This must start, and does in these organizations, with the artistic and executive leader together making these things happen. Now, I feel like before we go too much further, though, I need to acknowledge that this word, loyalty, in our sector in particular, has gotten a bit of a bad rap. If I'm being honest, I think in arts and culture, when we hear the word loyalty, we mostly think of old and white patrons. And yet, if you're familiar with Nina Simon's writing, in particular her book, excellent book, The Art of Relevance, you'll be reminded that at the same time that she says we must show up differently, more authentically, with the end goal of ongoing sustained relationship in mind, we must do those things. She also says you can measure this. And she offers two frameworks of measurement, something she calls relevance at the door. So if we are inviting new members of our community in, are they actually crossing the threshold, now virtually or physically? Relevance at the door and relevance in the room. That's the question where she says, are they actually staying in the room once they get there? And she argues we can and should be, must be measuring this. Now, you're going to have your own yardsticks. In some cases, new segments of your community engaging one time is the measurement, but she actually asks us to consider and ask ourselves, are new patrons, are new community members actually coming back? And let's not make assumptions in any way that the things that other existing patrons have enjoyed in their membership schemes, their subscription packages, their galas and events, let's not make assumptions that that's going to work now and into the future. But let's not make assumptions. And if we're going to do that, design that, co-create that with our audiences and communities, we've got to be in listening, engagement, and conversation mode. And that requires people. That requires people led by and people who see the system requirement, the culture shift required if we're going to get serious, if we're going to be bold about being good listeners and engagers in our communities. So today I want to introduce to you two of those leaders. Dan Bates is the chief exec at Sheffield Theatres in Sheffield, England, and Ashlie Corcoran is the artistic director at Arts Club Theatre Company in Vancouver. Dan will be talking with us today about several things, including the new digital Free Cheers for Sheffield engagement and offerings that they'll be doing here soon this fall. And Ashlie will be talking with us about Arts Club. And they're alive on 3 stages, then, now, and in the future. Welcome, Ashlie and Dan, and I'm so very pleased to have you with me today. Thanks for making the time, Ashlie, on Canada Day, and Dan for joining us at the end of your day. I'd like to start, Dan, with you, if you don't mind. We'll do a bit of ping-ponging back and forth, but you made the decision on behalf of Sheffield to join this cohort. You said listening matters. Why?
Gosh, Jill, I mean, it's always been important for us to listen. But I think since COVID struck us, it's been our imperative to listen. We're having to make such kind of fast decisions and react so kind of quickly. We couldn't do that without listening and talking to our audiences and getting their kind of responses and their feelings, really. And I think that has been the kind of imperative for us at Sheffield Theatres to kind of really take a snapshot of our organisation and go, what are you missing now? What, you know, you can't come to us. What can we do for you? And we wouldn't have known any of this without listening.
Yeah, right. Ashlie, this cohort and this decision that these theaters made, including yours, included the artistic leader joining into and prioritizing listening as well. So just from the artistic sensibility, why listen?
I mean, I think listening, that's a great question. I think listening is at the core of what we do as theater artists. We listen to each other in a rehearsal hall and come up with our plans. We invite our audience to come into an auditorium and listen and watch what's happening on stage. And through that listening, that's where empathy and compassion and imagination comes from. So I think it makes a lot of sense to think about that from an organizational perspective as well. I'd say that during this time of COVID and societal change, listening is even more important in this world where there can be binaries, and it's the only way that we can understand each other. Listening is difficult because sometimes you agree with what the other person is saying and you want to jump right in and not actually listen to everything. And then other times, what you're receiving is challenging you and it's difficult to listen. But as a human and as a leader at the Arts Club, it is one of our values and something that we are very much trying to practice every day.
Yeah, okay. Dan, well, actually, your organizations, both of yours and TRG, have worked together for a long time. But Dan, when we started this project together, you were listening, you were surveying, but you have been on a journey from annual surveys to where you are now. Can you just describe some elements and changes in that journey along the way operationally?
Yeah, definitely. I think we did used to just survey our audiences once a year to kind of collect some really useful data, really. And we just felt, you know, I mean, questionnaires tell you something, really, but it was quite a long old kind of questionnaire because it was once a year. We had to catch everything. And it just wasn't, we just weren't responsive. And actually, sometimes we didn't always, we examined it, but we probably didn't ever respond to anybody. There was no way of sort of a free kind of chat and kind of question, really. And I think again, since COVID, well, since working on the MPS program, that's been enabled us to be really responsive and really quickly. And it's about getting a very quick response to how something went, either the night before or the week before or on a season of work. We've been doing it, and we've just been really sort of grappling with the feedback that we've got, what we could change. What people liked about our show. So some of the questions have been about the experience of coming to the theatre, and some of it has been about the kind of creative choices that we've made. But I think, again, since COVID, being able to kind of hear very quickly from our audience about what's needed, but most importantly about how they're feeling, and about what is their feeling about coming back into a theatre. Will it be coming back next week? Will it be coming back in October, November? And again, I think with the MPS program, that will allow us to track people individually and about how their feelings are changing as the kind of crisis kind of goes on, really. So I think, you know, from listening to our audience about what they were missing, which is why we've created our new program, Free Cheers for Sheffield, and we're also going to do an outdoor kind of pop-up Shakespeare in the parks when our government will allow us to perform even outside, which is still not even allowing us to do at the moment. So that's sort of where we are, and that's all direct responses to our audience and listening to what they say. And I think just what Ashlie just said as well, I think also listening to trying not to jump in, which is my habit, but also listening to the silence, and that's also quite uncomfortable. And I've learned quite a lot about listening to silence as well, and not chipping in at those kind of times.
Yeah. So listening, what I heard from Dan is, you know, the kinds of administrative campaigns that I know, Ashlie, you've benefited from it at Arts Club, the way that the team has integrated that feedback in closed loops. He didn't say it, but we know that it's an integrated team that are choosing how and who will respond to audience feedback. You've got, so you as an artistic leader, you've been listening in a variety of ways that have included some of this NPS work, which I'd love to hear you talk about, but also in other ways. Tell us about how you listen as an artistic leader at Arts Club.
Yeah, so one of my favorite parts of my job is when I am actually stage directing pieces is the previews process. So at the Arts Club, we have about a week of previews where we're still, I'm still able to work with the actors and the design team to make changes to the final product. And I always say that we won't know where we're going to get to opening until we have those first audiences coming in, because we learn so much from them and how they respond. As a director, I like to sit right in the middle of audience members, and I'm listening to how they breathe, or where they don't breathe, or where they cough. You can learn a lot from where an audience coughs. I also like on some previews to sit at the side and look at them and listen to them that way. And we make really, really significant changes through that process. I will also, when I'm the artistic director and directing a show, I will, at the beginning, in the pre-show speech, I'll say, this is a preview, and you are our first audience, and you're such a key part of our process, and I'm here listening to you. And then lots of times people take that very literally, and on the intermission or afterwards, they'll come up and give me all their notes, which are always really useful. But it's just the organic listening that's important as well. But when we started NPS, it happened to be during a time that I was directing a show. And so in that first preview week, we were getting our first feedback. And a bunch of the feedback were the kinds of things that I was listening to as the artistic leader in the performance, where people were confused, what they couldn't hear, why something happened. And so I actually, with that cast and with that process, I was actually able to take that NPS feedback and say, I think that the audience is a bit confused here, because my spidey sense as a director helped me figure that out. But also I have some data to share with you from these emails that we've received. I wouldn't do that with every team. I certainly I wouldn't do that with a show that I'm not directing, but that group, we had such a incredible amount of safety together that it was an adventure that we were all on. As the artistic director of the Arts Club, oftentimes the way that I am closing loops is if there is someone who has very much felt through unhappy about a creative choice that we've made, and they give us that feedback through the NPS loop. So an example of that is as simple as we did Noises Off this year, and there was someone that we've had a long relationship with. Like, this person has been coming to the Arts Club for more than 20 years, and they really didn't understand why we made the choice for the actors to have British accents and why they weren't using Canadian accents. It wasn't a show I directed. It was a show someone else directed. Just won a Jessie Award for Best Productions. We're very proud of all the work that director did. And we had talked about whether there should be accents or not, and he had lots of reasons why he wanted there to be accents. So in reaching out to that audience member, I ended up having a long conversation, probably a 90-minute conversation with that gentleman about why the director had made that choice and how other choices could be made, how we make choices creatively. And then, you know, I think created quite a bond and a relationship with this particular donor, a person I had never had an opportunity to meet before. So the closing the loop part of the NPS, I think, is really important. And there's different people at the Arts Club who do that action in different ways, and that's my particular contribution.
Yeah. I know we're going to want to. In fact, there she is. Ethan Skripik, who's normally with us, is on holiday this week. So Caitlin Green, my esteemed colleague, is joining us to ensure that we're talking to the people in our virtual room. So Caitlin, I encourage you, let's hear from.
Yeah. Let's dive in. And I would welcome you all listening today to submit your questions with that Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen for Dan and Ashlie. We'll get through as many as we can here. I want to start with a question that came in advance of this session today to maybe all three of you. We'll see who wants to jump in here first. This is from Bonnie, who asked, what are the best ways to build loyalty when we're not producing in person? And I would add to that, what are you hearing now that you've started to do things not in person? What are you learning from your listening to help inform that?
Dan, why don't you take that first?
Yeah, I think the listening. We've talked about online resources and digital kind of activities. We didn't have a great stock of kind of back catalogue really, which is why we created Free Cheers, which was a direct response to them about finding out we've got some past productions from years ago, kind of reassembling the cast together for a kind of curated kind of chat as well. And that's sort of what people wanted to hear. They were the people they're missing seeing on stage and how they could kind of connect in with that really. And the Shakespeare in the Park was another kind of direct response from them. You can't come to us, but we could come to you or to the communities as well.
Great.
Yeah, I think I think it's quite a similar response. I guess the way that we're listening is through we've created something called a digital content platform where we're putting similar sort of work on that's connected to our regular website, and every week we send out a newsletter that has everything that the audience is going to see that week on that platform. And when we receive feedback through that, we're also using social media in a way that we probably haven't used to such an extent before. And we're lucky in Canada that we have something called the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy, where the government is subsidizing up to 75% of people's salaries. So that is how we've managed to keep our employees employed. We also were able to hire a group of 20 artists, performers, directors, designers as education and outreach specialists. So they're not acting. We're like being very careful that we don't go into the world of Canadian Actors Equity, but they are creating content that we're using on social media. A lot of that content are live workshops. And so we're engaging with a particular part of our demographic. Every week now we have about 7 to 9 workshops where there's actually, some of them are webinars like this, but most of them are Zoom meeting rooms where we're actually able to talk back and forth with our patrons and our participants. So that's been a big way to learn. And we do NPS surveys after each of those as well.
Yeah.
All right, here's another one. This is anonymous, and they've asked, are you as organizations able to intake critical feedback? And how do you manage that?
It's like, that's a great question. I think as an organization, yes, we are able to do that. As a human, yes. Though, like, I have thin skin and a strong core. But the thing about criticism is, it's really just asking people how they feel and why they feel that way. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to pivot artistic programming. It could mean that. But what's more important is asking the how and the why and creating that relationship. And for myself as an artistic leader and as a human, like something I'm thinking a lot about right now during this time is how much I learn and change every day. And I learn and change every day by being open to that kind of feedback.
Dan, I want to hear your answer to that question too.
Yeah, I think you answered that so well. I think it's sort of depersonalizing it, isn't it? Really, and actually, we've had a lot of experience of we get people from Yorkshire are very, very frank about what they want to tell you. They just say it. And that took me a while to get used to. But now with NPS and kind of closing the loop kind of conversations, it's about, you know, you can't always absolutely, you're not actually going to solve some of their kind of challenges about, say, creative choices or something like that. But at least they've had a dialogue and they've had a kind of chance. And we've been able to kind of turn people around from, you know, loathing us to actually really appreciating that kind of dialogue. And it continues, you know, and it's sort of, yeah, that dialogue is, you know, you carry on the conversation that you might have started 6 months ago, and next time they see you, they're off again, as if there's been no gap. So, yeah.
I'm sorry, Dan. Oh, Caitlin, we have time for one more, I think, directed maybe at one person. So,
Jill, I'm giving this one to you. It's a double.
Right.
So first, quickly, remind us here what NPS is. And as the follow-up, what should we be asking patrons right now?
Yeah, okay, that's a great segue, actually. So NPS is Net Promoter Score. You can Google that and you'll get a lot of information about it. It's the studied methodology that that Fred and the Net Promoter System team have determined this question: would you recommend to a friend? Would you recommend this thing to a friend, this service to a friend on a 0 to 10 scale? Would you recommend it? And then you fit into a series of buckets that actually, as I cue us up toward the end and take us to that, I think is less the point. It's why I didn't create the definition around NPS, because this group has used that framework to listen, but the most important piece here and bit is starting to listen. So here are some next steps that we would say to take. The first is to set a priority, a program, a segment, a part of your community where there's the biggest opportunity or risk. Define something that you or your team can act on, and then decide, how are you going to listen? How are you going to engage? And select the right tool. It could be survey, could be a phone call, could be email. It could be the would you recommend framework. It could also be 0 to 5. The point is, are you asking me if I'm hitting it right, if you're hitting it right? And are you engaging me in a conversation about why or why not? Then third would be set up your whole team. Chief exec, Dan, Ashlie, artistic director, and underneath and with them is box office and marketing and development and education, who are taking data in to review it, to see what are we learning, and closing loops, making plans for the kind of callback that Ashlie described and that Dan's team is doing. And then act, or don't, react, and repeat this activity. So you'll get a copy of this deck. These are the next steps that you can take in your organization. And here's one more. There is a cohort of leaders and organizations that are 500 or more now that have joined the COVID sector benchmark. You can sign up on the URL that is at the bottom of this page, but new data is being organized and benchmark dashboards are being released regularly. This is the most recent one. We're now starting to report on philanthropic data. By becoming a free member of this cohort, you will be among a group of organizations who are using data to listen to how your organization is performing in the context of your genre, your cohort, your nation. And most importantly, we'll be listening for how data can help us point paths to resilience and recovery. Join this benchmark now. Also, join us for our next TRG 30. These are the sessions that are coming up that are a direct result of the things we're hearing from you. What does innovation look like? How do we think about inclusion and diversity and equity? And how do we put artists at the center? What are organizations doing to do that? What are the practitioners doing? Two excellent practitioners with us today, Ashlie and Dan. I couldn't thank you enough for joining us to talk about how do we listen during this hard time. We at TRG want to listen to you too. So at the end of each session, we email you and ask you for feedback. That's the Net Promoter System in action. Give us your feedback. Tell us how we can improve and tell us what's on your mind. It helps us shape the agenda and the plans for our future. Join me next week. Caitlin, thank you for being such an excellent partner today. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you. We'll see you next week. Happy 4th of July holiday and Canada Day.